Kind of cold on the tapestry thing, though, a little bit. I, uh, I do want to thank you and the full committee chair and ranking member of the full committee for considering HR 915 today for a hearing and hopefully moving it rapidly to committee action. It's been a 5-year process and a wait, and we do it at a very appropriate time today, and I think it is a fitting tribute in many ways to the fine work the Peace Corps has done and to a legacy of public service that I think we need to acknowledge. And so thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. The National Geographic Channel has a show called Doomsday Preppers. And it chronicles people who go to extreme preparation for cataclysmic events. Obviously, it's extreme behavior that is always worthy of a reality show. Today, I feel like we're bringing Doomsday Preppers to Capitol Hill. The bills before us today are variations of extreme behavior regarding the past and now the projected future government shutdowns in our beloved national park system. I welcome the discussion about the value of public lands. I'm glad to see the majority acknowledge that our national park and wildlife areas are economic engines in our rural communities and to their economies. But like so many of the majority's bills considered by this committee, the legislation we will discuss today take those shared values and twist them into divisive, partisan extremes. First, I want to address the legislation H.R. 3286. During this irresponsible majority-led government shutdown, my colleagues on the other side must have had an epiphany. Guess what? National parks are part of the federal government. And when you shut down the government, you also shut down the parks. And guess what? Americans love their parks, and they gave those responsible for the shutdown more than an earful. When Secretary Jewell allowed states to open national parks, she made it pretty clear. There was no guarantee that these states would ever get reimbursed. Governors of states who signed these donation agreements knew they would need to come to a cash-strapped Congress and argue that the federal government should cut their state a check. What troubled me about the agreements and what troubles me today is that states want to have their cake and eat it too. Both Utah legislature and Arizona legislature passed legislation requiring the federal government to turn over federal lands to the state. Governor Herbert signed the legislation. Governor Brewer did not, citing correctly concerns with constitutional issues. From what I can piece together, the state of Utah has already dedicated at least $2 million to implementing that legislation, HB 148, which is more than they are asking for today. If that isn't enough, we have another bill that prepares for perhaps another future majority-led shutdown. H.R. 3311 would automatically allow states to take over national parks if there is another shutdown. Then the icing on the cake is H.R. 3294. This legislation just turns over control of the lands, not only turns over controls of the land, but treats Uncle Sam like a sucker. First, the bill would allow state law to override federal statute. Second, it doesn't appear that the state assumes any liability for federal lands. The states are not required to waive their sovereign immunity. So the states would take over control of our federal lands, but the federal government would be on the financial and legal hook if something were to go wrong. Finally, the federal government has limited recourse to take back control of the lands if the states are poorly managing their assets. On the other hand, states are given authority to end any agreement if they no longer find it beneficial. From what I can tell today, this hearing is about creating cover for members who finally felt the sting from voters upset that their views were not being represented in Congress. A recent Hart research poll found that the American public had very negative feelings about the government shutdown. More relevant to today's hearing is that over half of the electorate believed that closing national parks and public lands during a shutdown was a big, major problem. As for members of this committee who advocate for turning over federal lands to the state, the polls showed overwhelmingly that the forced shutdown of national parks served to remind people of the importance of their national parks and public lands. We shouldn't be funneling federal money to states that are actively trying to take over federal lands. We shouldn't be coming up with doomsday preparations for the next shutdown. And we certainly shouldn't be turning over public lands, economic assets that belong to all Americans, to individual states, especially if the federal government will still hold all the liability. This is not right. We should view this hearing like people view the doomsday preppers, for its entertainment value only. And with that, I yield back.